Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the marketplace. Coming up, World Bank upbeat about Ghana's economic recovery as it projects almost 3% end-of-year growth rate for the country.
Growth is going to come into about 2.8%, 2.9% this year. That's our projection in the same as 2023. So growth is not the levels that Ghana has seen in the past.
Also coming up, Ghana cedi narrows year-to-date loss to the dollar to about 7.50% on the retail market as the local currency made gains against the American greenback last week. Plus, Africa Tourism Research Network urges government to reconsider decision to increase passport application fees. We'll speak with the President, Emmanuel Frimpong. My name is Daryl. Kwawu. Thanks for being with us. Details coming up. Thanks for staying with us, everyone. First up, the World Bank is optimistic about Ghana's economic recovery after recent challenges. It is therefore projecting that the country's economic growth the country's economy will grow at a rate of 2.9% in 2024, slightly higher than what government has forecast in the 2024 budget. Andrew Dublin is World Bank chief economist and has been speaking to Joy Business from Washington, D.C. in the U.S.
Responses will be multiple, right? So domestically, you're talking about specifically about the shocks that come from what? Inflation, high interest rates, global.
And the bit about the fact that most of what the developing countries' recovery hinges on what happens in those developed economies. What should be the policy options for countries like Ghana in putting in place measures to minimize the expected shocks?
Yeah, so suddenly, African countries are not isolated from the rest of the world. They are, we are a globalized, world, and we trade with a lot of countries outside of our continent. In fact, a lot of our trade is with other countries outside of the continent. So shocks that happen, trade shocks, like we've seen. With Ukraine, war in Ukraine, and maybe even not nearly as much at the moment, but even disruptions that are going on in the Red Sea potentially could have impact for some countries. So these shocks will happen, and downturns will happen, right? So you should be able to see, for example, if there is a slower than expected growth in major trading partners for Africa, such as the US, Europe, China, that will affect growth in Africa. So what can African countries do? Now, in principle, what you could do, of course, as African countries, is to really focus on domestic reforms.
In terms of growth rate, you projected, I think, slightly above 2% for Ghana. That's way lower than what government has targeted of about 2.8%. In terms of the growth outlook, is the World Bank a little bit measured Ghana than more of a robust outlook?
Yeah. So our most recent, I don't know what you're looking at, but our most recent estimate is that
in the Africa Pulse report, yeah. In the Africa Pulse report,
growth is going to come into about 2.8%, 2.9% this year. That's our projection in the same as 2023.
Oh, so your growth rate is 2.8%.
Yes, 2.8, 2.9 thereabouts. So that's our forecast. And so growth is not the levels that Ghana has seen in the past. We expect to see Ghana perhaps return back to about 5% growth rate around 2026. That's our focus, our projection going forward. But for 2023 and 2020, 2024, our focus is that it will grow at about 2.9%. And the reason is because of, similar stories that I told you about the rest of Africa, which is Ghana is dealing with high levels of debt. It's dealing with high levels of inflation. And so, when you have high levels of debt, government spending and government investments are constrained. And when you have high levels of inflation, you're likely to see interest rates rise by the central, raised by the central bank in order to be able to bring inflation down. So that will weigh down on consumption and investments. And so, you will see these kinds of developments weigh down on economic activity in Ghana.
Some would say that is interesting, because when I go through Government of Ghana budget, they are also projecting a 2.8% end of year target. It appears that you are quite robust about growth for this year, despite all these challenges from the World Bank's perspective.
Yeah, and I think there are three reasons why there is this focus, right? One is the expectation that, in fact, the fiscal consolidation is taking hold.
All right. That was the conversation with the chief economist from the World Bank. They want to bring in for a quick reaction on Zoom Dr. Patrick Kumi, who is an economist. Good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. So, feasible projection, 2.9%. What do you think?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to viewers. Yeah, I think it's feasible. I actually think that we could end up slightly higher. In recent times, I think both the bank and the fund, they've tended to be more conservative in their projections for the Ghanaian economy. So you realize that last year, the economy outperformed their projections, even including the government's projection. And I also do think that being an election year, we are likely to see a little bit more spending than planned towards the end of the year, especially if we are successful with the debt restructuring. That is going to provide the government a little bit more fiscal space. And you get the sense that, especially in the area of construction on road, there will be some explosion of spending around that time. So generally, I expect that we should be able to outperform even the 2.9 that is being projected.
Seems to think that the high levels of debt as well as inflation could be a threat to our economic growth and the projections that have been made.
Yeah, I think the debt is a problem. But, in Ghana's case, it's a little bit, we've gone a little bit far in terms of our debt restructuring compared to some other African countries. Don't forget that we have a framework with our bilateral partners. We are now doing discussions with our commercial partners. But we made substantial savings from even the domestic debt exchange. That should give the government some fiscal space. And that gives it a little bit more room. What may happen, though, is that we will see a little bit more government expenditure, but we will see less efficiency in the public expenditure. Because once we get through it, once the election gets close and the election is expected to be tight again, we always get these off-budget expenditures, which usually you only get to see after the fact, after the election has happened. So, and those ones don't go through more rigorous criteria for what we commit the funds to. So that threat is there. Then the other side is, we begin to see that pressures for inflation, especially in the second quarter, might build. We've seen discussions about increases in transport fares.
Right.
And we've seen the currency begin to wobble a little bit. So all of those are threats. But you get the sense that if in the second half of the year, the advanced economies begin to ease up their financing constraint, and then also we've made progress with our own domestic debt restructuring, you will see more fiscal space, and then the government in an election year with fiscal space will definitely spend.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about it over and over again about this being an election year and that the government has to check spending and all of that. The World Bank seems to think that policy slippages during this election year could be a major threat?
I'm actually expecting that the threat will actually materialize. I think, so we've gone through this for a long time. Even though we get promises upon promises that we will overspend, I think the incentive to overspend is extremely strong. And I don't think the controls to prevent that overspending is enough. We are hoping that we might be able to get the fiscal council in place and all, but we know how things work in this country. We might put the laws in place and we find the ways around it. So I am actually expecting that the policy slippages will actually happen. It's just a matter of extent, and then you just hope that the extra budgetary spending is committed to things that will have a long-term value, especially if that went to fixing our energy problems, we won't complain too much. Or if that went to fixing some of our infrastructure, which is beginning to deteriorate, that won't hurt too much. But if a lot of it goes to spending, then the real troubles will begin after the election year.
So what policy reforms do we need to put in place to aid our recovery and sustain the growth that we are witnessing? Plus, I was just taking a look at the GDP estimates for last year, and industry still continues to struggle.
I think right now, given that we are in an IMF program, I think reforms aimed at strengthening governance is crucial. I think right now the biggest threat is following through the budget, the execution as we have it. So, and then also reforms to curb corruption, because those are major problems that we've had. So I think the issue about whether government will stay true to its plan, I've already said that that's unlikely to happen. But these are times for us to lay foundation. So I think the governance side, the financial governance side, the economic governance side, the political governance side, that those reforms are crucial. Then when we move outside of that, at the same time, we still need to make investment for our long-term future. And I think whatever we can do to fix the energy problems, we see all the difficulties for energy sector. The government has been reluctant to admit them. But the thing with, especially the electricity side, is that if our lights are not on, they are not on. There's nothing we can do, no propaganda will change that fact. I think it will be good that the government admits and we begin to find long-term solutions to the energy challenges, so that while we are going through the IMF program, strengthening the macroeconomic environment, we are also building for the future. We are laying a stronger foundation for the future, because if the energy problems we had last year, energy production, electricity production alone was 10% lower than the year before. So regardless of what the political leaders will tell us, we are not having any dooms or whatever they think, the fact is clear. So I think we need to pay attention to fixing the energy sector. And if we do, we will lay ourselves a stronger foundation going forward.
Dr. Patrick Kumi, thank you so much for your time and the insights appreciated. You're watching The Marketplace. Now, let's turn to currency news. The Ghana cedi narrowed its year-to-date loss to the US dollar to about 7.50% on the retail market after making some gains against the US dollar and the other major foreign currencies last week. This follows the receipt of $300 million from the World Bank and some remittances during the Easter holidays. Here's more in this report.
Depreciated pressure on the local currency. These developments resulted in improved selling activity by the Bank of Ghana on the spot market, supporting the cedi against the major trading currencies. The local unit gained 0.56% week on week against the dollar, closing at a mid-rate of 13 cedis 43 pesos. Similarly, the cedi gained 1.51% and 0.35% week on week against the pound and the euro on the retail market. The International Monetary Fund mission team arrived in Ghana to evaluate the progress made by Ghana regarding the fund support program. A successful review will pave the way for a third tranche disbursement of $360 million under the $3 billion extended credit facility. Analysts believe a successful review will boost market sentiments around the cedi and help curb speculative activities.
It's not just the Ghana cedi under pressure. Nigeria is facing challenges of its own. In fact, the IMF has warned that the Naira may experience further 35% depreciation in 2024 due to Nigeria's production challenges. It said that the country's growth could fall to 0 in 2024 this year and only slowly recover to 2% in 2028. Joining me on Zoom is Chibueze Jos Ijobo, who is founder and CEO of ABOC, a B2B e-commerce marketplace enabling export distribution and intra-Africa trade for African manufacturers. It is based in Nigeria. Thank you for joining us, Chibueze. Just how grim is the situation with the Naira?
Yeah, it's been a very difficult moment for Naira. And as a matter of fact, early last month and early end of February, a lot of companies that I know, some that we do some business with, stopped selling some of their product because of the stability of Naira. Then it was swinging so high. Today he wakes up, it's added how many basis points, the next day is down. So it is, but we tell you that recently, in about a week or two ago, Naira is becoming a little more stable. Some of the government policies helping. But then, in the long term, I don't really see us making much progress until not just Nigeria, Ghana, or any other country in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, start seeing the issue of currency depreciation as a supply issue as against demand issue. Because oftentimes I think most of the inflation and depreciation our government has seen is more of a demand issue rather than supply issue. And that is why we are in the situation where we are now.
And how has that situation impacted the business community?
It has really affected the business community so much. In fact, in Nigeria, the latest World Bank report shows that Nigeria, Ethiopia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Sierra Leone is having a very high, in fact, more than double-digit inflation. And food inflation in Nigeria alone, from the Nigeria Statistics Board, is over 37%. The monetary policy ratio is over 24.7% now. So if you look at all this, the businesses here, some have collapsed. We have had more than 3 multinationals, GSK inclusive, leave Nigeria. And the reason being that the unsustainability of the depreciation of the currency is having a lot of effect on their balance sheet, especially for those who have borrowed a lot in dollars. And the major problem we also have to understand is that beyond you marking up your product price, you have to understand that a lot of production that are happening locally in Nigeria and some of these African countries, the inputs are important. For instance, we have increased our wheat consumption over the years from the last decade a lot. In fact, prior to when we have the noodles, Indomie and other brands now, we're not consuming as much wheat as we are doing now. But today, because of the popularity of noodles, we have high consumption of wheat, and wheat are heavily imported. So it consumes a lot of our forests, as well as other things that we're using here, including oils. But as we're having Dangote refinery coming on board, it's going to help stabilize. But the major thing is this: African, especially sub-Saharan Africa, have not really been able to look at the impact of the informal sector, of the unstructured way our trade happens here across Africa. Because the informal way we do our trade across, especially in West Africa, affects our policy a lot, but nobody has really captured that. For instance, Ghana coconut is very popular in Nigeria. A lot of the pineapple that we consume here comes from Benin Republic. But the fact is that these things do not pass through the normal importation process. So therefore, it affects the currency rate at that level. So if you see Naira, the dollar has dropped, but the price of coconut or the pineapple has not dropped. So until African governments look at more ways to structure the informal sector, we will have more grip on control of our currency. And in that area, we have seen a lot of interest from across African countries. companies in Ghana, in Nigeria, are looking for ways to ensure their production locally, and we are having a lot of interest in that sector.
You talk about measures put in place by the government to fix the challenges. Are these measures working? Plus, today I read that Nigeria's central bank has offered to sell dollars at a rate of over 1,000 naira to stabilize the local currency. How is the market responding to that?
Yeah, the market responding positively. But my worry is that beyond now, if you look at our reserve, it depreciated by 1.something billion in the last 2 weeks. So Nigeria has done a lot of forward trade sale of their oil, used the receipt to fight the depreciation of naira. But how long are we going to continue doing this? If you look at it in the long term, at the end of the year, the next 2 years, where are we going to get the dollar to keep fighting the depreciation of naira? So yes, the policy right now is having an effect. The tightening of the monetary policy is reducing the cash available for trading in dollar and all that. But then, in the long term, I don't see this as it's a cycle that will come on up every year. And until we increase our local production and sourcing of our raw materials locally, either you're sourcing from Ghana or the intra-African trade as a whole need to be well strengthened to improve from the level it is now for our currency to start feeling the effect in the long term.
All right. Two countries, similar stories. Thank you so much, Chibueze George Izogbo, who is founder and CEO of ABOC, speaking to us from Nigeria. Thank you so much for making time. Well, the Africa Tourism Research Network is raising issues with the new passport application fees announced by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is asking government to reconsider. Emmanuel Frimpong is president of the network. He joins us on Zoom to share some thoughts on this as well. And Emmanuel, it does not appear that the government is going to reverse its decision. What are your concerns about the increment in the passport application fees?
Well, Daryl, good afternoon, and good afternoon to your cherished viewers and listeners. Yes, so I wouldn't want to say the government will not change its mind on this decision.
At least for now.
Sorry?
I was just saying, at least for now.
Yes, at least, yes. So we are still engaging, and I want to believe that the government is a listening government and wants to do what the public thinks is in their interest. Because if you look at the increases that we've seen, it's just too much. From 100 cities, the 32-page passport, to 500 cities, 400 increment is way too much, and it's going to affect tourism. And probably you ask me how, and then I can go into that.
And so I ask you, exactly how?
Yeah, so Daryl, if you look at tourism, we look at tourism from two perspectives. We look at tourism from the domestic tourism and then from international tourism. Now, I heard the earlier speaker also talking about intra-Africa trade. If you look at what AFTA is trying to do to promote intra-Africa trade, obviously at the moment, the only means of travel or the recognized means for travel within the continent is our ECOWAS passport, which is a passport that we have. So if we are promoting intra-Africa trade, then obviously people should have access to their passport. Since we have decided not to make accessibility easy for Africans to travel within Africa. The other thing that we have to look at is if people are traveling even beyond Africa for tourism purposes, whatever purposes it is, they will need their passport to travel. And tourism helps us. If you look at the airport, the number of people that are traveling, the taxes alone on tickets and other activities that people get themselves involved to travel is a lot. And if we are going to increase these passports, then obviously people's disposable income is going to be reduced. Already people are struggling. And tourism is seen as more or less a leisure activity in our part of the world. Therefore, people will rather want to use the little money they have for other things rather than anything tourism. So if we want to promote tourism, either domestic tourism, international tourism, whatever form of tourism we want to promote, then anything that will restrict people's disposable income will have negative impact on their tourism experiences or the way they do their tourism. So that is where we are looking at it from. And for me, that if indeed there has to be some increment, I don't think it should be the way we are seeing it, 400%. And then also bringing everything at a go. The government could have staggered it, gradual process, increment from maybe 100 to 200, or 100 to 150, 100 to 250. That would have prepared people to actually cite themselves, and then they can prepare and pay. But to bring it all of a sudden at this rate is ridiculous.
You also bring up the issue of the e-visa project. You were asking the Minister of Foreign Affairs what has happened to it. Refresh our memories a bit, because I feel that a lot of us have forgotten about what the e-visa project was about and where we are at right now.
Well, so the e-visa project, as we've seen a lot of countries going for e-visa, basically is to help people to apply for a visa online. So you don't necessarily have to go to any embassy of Ghana or High Commission to get your visa, and people can just apply anywhere they are. And we have seen that, and then everybody knows that e-visa is the order of the day. Other countries are doing it. And if we are competing with other countries, then there's the need for us to take advantage of the e-visa regime. And we heard that contract has been almost given to a company, and we hear all sorts of things. Now, we don't know where the e-visa project is. What I have learned that is now a cabinet is instructing some of the ministries that are involved to actually speed it up. We don't know how soon that will come to play. But if we don't take advantage of it, all other countries around us are going for e-visa. Therefore, there is the need for us to also go for e-visa so that people can easily get visa to come to Ghana, if indeed we are serious about getting international arrivals into the country.
Emmanuel Frimpong, President of the Africa Tourism Research Network, thank you so much for joining us on The Marketplace. There is more news on our website, myjoyonline.com/business. My name is Daryl. Kwawu. Thanks for watching.